In 1990, Teddy Wang, one of Hong Kong's most prominent businessmen, was kidnapped again. Steve Vickers was the detective with the Royal Hong Kong Police and the man in charge of the investigations that broke the case.
The kidnapping was such a high-profile case for a series of reasons. One, the size of the demand, $60 million was probably one of the largest in the world at that time. Secondly, Teddy Wang's profile. He was a very large property magnate, very famous in the local community. And thirdly, this was the second time that he'd been kidnapped.
In Steve Vickers' opinion, the case could be more than just a kidnapping.
What was patently obvious to me was this was a deliberate murder once he'd been lifted onto the boat. There was no intention of him ever going back once he'd been kidnapped.
From the subsequent testimony of the arrested kidnappers, it was revealed that the plot to capture Teddy Wang was conceived in 1987, 3 years prior.
What we think happened was at around 7:50 in the evening, Teddy Wang left the Royal Hong Kong Jockey Club gym and moved to the car park and got into his Mercedes-Benz car. As he left the Jockey Club, the motorcycle followed and the two cars followed in line. Subsequently, when they get nearer to his home on the Peak Road, one of the cars zoomed in front and blocked the road. The second car blocked the rear departure and 6 men alighted. One of them produced a firearm and another an axe. They then smashed the side window and there was a struggle. He resisted. They forced him onto the rear seat of his own vehicle and amazingly took his shoes off. They appeared to believe that there were tracking devices in the heels of his shoes. We think Teddy was then tied up or rolled up into some form of tarpaulin. He was then driven to a rendezvous point where he met a small sampan, carried onto the boat and taken out of waters a little while until they met a larger fishing boat. One of the arrested persons later admitted to drugging him. They gave him a Coca-Cola laced with drugs, which caused caused some form of semi-paralysis.
For Steve Vickers, this was one of the most complicated and interesting cases he had ever encountered.
It was quite apparent from the nature of the phone calls that were coming in. They were very clear about what they wanted money-wise. Each of the phone calls that came in came from a different city in China. So each day there was a different call at or around roughly the same time, but each day it was from a separate city in China. Later, at the end of the case, we realized that the people making the call were operating from a prepared script and that they were reading from the script each day, but in fact they didn't have any live dialogue with the command and control or the kidnappers on the ground.
Steve Vickers realized that this is a kidnapping operation involving criminals from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China. Teddy's wife, Nina, decided to pay the ransom.
I informed them that there was no proof of life and that in my experience, without a proof of life, you shouldn't pay. And ultimately, it was decided that she would pay $30 million. And the only thing that we intervened with, we managed to persuade them that the money should not be paid in one tranche to the account concerned, but that it should be dripped in many currencies over a period of time. This bought us some time.
Steve Vickers had to come up with a clever plan to capture the kidnappers.
Our guess was that the kidnappers would want to keep dipping in that account to see whether or not the money was there, and we were right. Bit by bit, we found that they began to access the account electronically to see how much money was there. As the money began to top up, the frequency of their access to the account continued. We cannibalized the surveillance capability and put 2 or 3 men near every ATM machine that we could find in those days. And on the 4th bite, we got lucky. We actually eyeballed one of the kidnappers or one of the syndicate.
Immediately, the suspect was put under surveillance. Steve Vickers knew that he was just a minor player in the scheme, and to catch the masterminds, he would have to be patient.
We then put together a large number of folders, and simultaneously here in Hong Kong and in Taiwan and in other jurisdictions, we launched an operation to pick up the people that we were able to identify. And that essentially is how the case was closed.
4 kidnappers were arrested and jailed in 1991. Subsequently, one of the masterminds, Chen Chi Wan, was jailed for life in March 1992. Teddy Wang's body was never recovered, but his kidnappers later admitted they had dumped him in the South China Sea. He was declared legally dead in September 1999.